To the surprise of no one, 9 years later, Common Core still sucks. South Carolina wants to track your babies as if they were rare and endangered ferrets. California back in the news about sex, and Donald Trump signs an executive order protecting free speech on college campuses. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week, Katie and I cover those stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the globe. Greetings to all of our listeners. If you haven't done so already, get off the stick and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode. And make sure you stick around because we're going to be talking about Amherst College in Massachusetts and how they are rewriting language, defining ways that all campus personnel must talk about certain issues. Let me do an Amherst definition of your Argyle sweater. It is an incidence of Scottish supremacism, tribalism, and clans-like behavior that is effrontery to anybody who is not white like you. That's coming up later. If you want to hear more really interesting Amherst definitions of things, you won't want to miss that. But we go to our first story today, and it's a great big fat "we've told you so." In fact, I've told you so over 700 times across the country giving speeches about Common Core. What we now know about Common Core 9 years in is everything, and I'm taking a victory lap, right? Give me a camera here, Mike. Right, here's my It's so hard to be right all the time. 9 years into Common Core, we have a great editorial, an article from The Federalist, our good friend Joy Pullman over there, who the title of her article is 9 years into Common Core, test scores are down, indoctrination up. And here's a direct quote from the article from Joy. ACT scores released earlier this month show that students' math achievement is at a 20-year low. Let that sink in for a minute. Every 5 years in this country, Katie, we've been reinventing ways to teach math. We've been teaching math for 2,000 years exactly the same way, and it worked for Euclid and Pythagoras, and it worked for Einstein, right? But no, all of these educrats now have to take simple memorization of multiplication tables, and now you got to do essays about math, and you have to draw pictures about math. Is it any wonder? Math-inclined kids can't do it. Math achievement is at a 20-year low. The latest English ACT scores are down since 2007, and students' readiness for college-level English was at its lowest level since the ACT's creators began measuring that item in 2002. And let me tell you, as a university professor, I have freshmen at my university right now, kids who have been, for the last 4 years through high school, Common Core indoctrinated. They cannot read beyond an 8th grade level. They are unable of grasping difficult concepts. They can't read poetic language at all. We literally now, my freshmen are 8th graders.
When I got out of high school right as this was going to start happening with No Child Left Behind and then the whole curriculum changing. But then I came back to get my teaching degree and I saw such a shift. And you're exactly right. Your freshmen in college are actually like 8th graders in a K-12 system. They can't read. They can't understand what's put in front of them. And it's because we're going to go to a graphic here we have for our visual learners. You can see just by looking at this graph the difference in what happened when Common Core was implemented. Just looking at the graphic, not even taking too much into it, on the left, it looks like things are high and things are good. And that's from 2000 to 2009. And then as soon as you implement Common Core, all of a sudden that achievement drops dramatically. And this is across the board. And this is actually a racial breakdown of white, black, and Hispanic. And you can see the detriment that it has caused.
I have a colleague, Katie, and she asked me to pass, she actually before the show asked me to pass this on to you. I have a colleague, the great Diane M. down in Florida, who's a college professor now, but she used to teach in a swanky college prep school, high school. And her kids in college this semester could not recognize words like sorrow. They were reading a basic test and a text, and they had to be explained what those words meant. At this prep school, this highly funded prep school, she was told by her headmaster that you have to give a student who is getting a C an A because the father had just donated millions of dollars to the school, right? And so, Diane, we want to give a shout out to you down in Florida. And this is amazing what you see across this country here. Almost a year ago, Joy Pullman says that she wrote about the latest round of international tests that are published every 5 years, right? The international measurements. They showed that that U.S. fourth graders declined on reading achievement, fourth graders. In 2015, the results on the most reliable nationwide U.S. test showed the first ever significant decline decline of 2 to 3 points, about a quarter of a grade level worth of reading comprehension. In mathematics at both grades 4 and 8, and in grade 4 reading. The next iteration of that test showed absolutely no gains again. These kids are not getting better. The failed systems we're using, primarily Common Core related systems, and going back through the No Child Left Behind era of George Bush, this is ridiculous. It's failing our kids. And not only do teachers and administrators not seem to care, the administrators are doubling down on more ideology, more transgenderism, more global warming, more bad math content, more bad math pedagogy. The teachers are striking all across the country, commie, right, red for ed, to get more money to teach our kids less and less. And I'm a college professor dealing with basically middle school students now, and no one seems to be the least bit concerned about this.
Well, on that note, before we move on to the second story, just a quick reminder for everyone, you guys make this show possible. So please, please help us keep it going by sharing the episode on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and share the podcast version on iTunes. It's a really quick thing, and it helps us continue to get the word out on the Dr. Duke Show. All right, well, moving on. We have a story out of South Carolina where South Carolina politicians, the House, just passed an education bill. It's called H3759, and it passed 113 to 4. So pretty much everyone in the House agreed to this bill. And it's talking about education, and there's lots and lots of different items in there. It's an 80-page document. But some of the language that they use throughout this document, and we're going to get into it a little bit more, includes workforce development system and workforce pipeline. So you know when they start using language like that involving education, what their real motives are. So we had Representative Shannon Erickson, who actually, she was fighting in favor of the bill, and we have a video clip of her, and she's saying some pretty outrageous things.
One of the things that the bill does is coordinate efforts to know where our 0 to 5 population actually is. Right now, we have such a hodgepodge of a system, some children in public, some in private, some in a combination of the two, some with First Steps, some with faith-based, some in-home, and they all have different degrees of accountability, and really, truly no one group is following where these children are.
Let me reiterate that. She said, one of the things this bill does is coordinate efforts to know where our 0 to 5-year-old population is. You don't need to know where my infant child is. It is none of your damn business with South Carolina, and this is going on across state after state after state. There's a reason we don't put kids into school till they're 5 years old, because they're none of your business. You've already got your filthy, poorly educated mitts into them in kindergarten, and now you want them for mandatory pre-K. It is none of your business what our kids are doing. I'm sorry, this idea that you're going to start tracking kids at age 0, and now all of that workforce stuff, all of this, we got to funnel these kids into the workforce, prepare them for career. This is a very dangerous game they're playing, and they're doing it in states like, not just South Carolina, which is a reliable red state, right? Places like Indiana's doing this. These are not just places like Massachusetts and California that think they have the right now to basically tag and track your children like they're gazelles from the moment they emerge from your womb, assuming you don't rip them in shreds first, because, you know, that's what you're allowed to do now in New York and Virginia.
Well, she goes on, though. She has plenty more to say about accounting for our children.
I'm telling you that our families deserve our support in all of those different groups, no matter where they choose to educate their children, but that we have a responsibility to know where they are, to account for them, and to know where they're going and how they're doing so that we can measure the progress. If we do not measure it, it will not get done.
They also argued that there needs to be a teacher bill of rights. This gets me amazingly. We have no bill of rights for our kids. We can't guarantee free speech to our kids. We can't protect our kids from radical sexuality at the young ages. We can't teach our kids to read at a 4th grade level or do math at an 8th grade level if they're 4th and 8th graders. They have no rights at all when their teachers march out and protest in the middle of a school year demanding higher pay. So we're going to give the teachers a bill of rights. Why not just go all the way? Let's give school superintendent bill of rights, right? A mandatory 10% raise every year for your failed schools. The only people whose rights we're not concerned about is the kids. The so-called teacher bill of rights also adopted changes that would give teachers a daily 30-minute planning period. Oh, good, study hall for teachers now. A daily 30-minute planning period, and give teachers who live and work in rural high-poverty school districts a refundable income tax credit equal to 100% of their property taxes for up to 5 years. So we'll raise property taxes on the poor moms and dads who send their kids to these failed failed schools to give a tax break to the teachers who aren't teaching them what they need to know. Outstanding.
House Speaker Jay Lucas, he's actually a Republican from Darlington, and he said, I'm proud of the work the House, the education community, and the business community have put into this bill. Our teachers and students deserve better, and the passing of this bill is a right step in bringing our education system into the 21st century.
Yeah, and what does the 21st century education system look like? More money for teachers who struggle to meet these stupid standards and who don't get the job done. More money for superintendents in schools and administrators. More money to socially monitor your kids. More money for all sort of outside interventionism, social, psychological interventionism in your kids' classrooms. More money to bring child molesting drag queens, as happened in Houston, child molesting drag queens to libraries to read to your 5-year-olds. And no money whatsoever to fix why our kids can't read, to make sure that we're teaching kids tried and true pedagogy going back before the creation of the Department of Education that used to make American education preeminent in the world. No money for that, no money, no tax breaks for parents, no money for families to find alternative ways to educate their kids in this broken system. This is the 21st century school.
Let's head over to California where, you have your middle schooler come home every day after school, and hopefully you say, hey, what'd you learn in school today? Well, parents of Santa Ana School District, it's one of the largest school districts, it's in Southern California, I doubt they were expecting that their 11-year-old would come home and say, well, today we had an LGBT fair, and there were some people in drag, and they were giving makeup lessons. Well, Town Hall's Kira Davis reported that's exactly what happened. She then went to a school board meeting where parents were discussing exactly what happened with this LGBT fair and why it was happening at their school. And all these parents filled the room and were questioning how they were not notified at all.
So you're listening, Mom and Dad, right? I mean, your kids can't do 4th grade math in 4th grade. They can't do 8th grade reading and 8th grade math in 8th grade reading. By the time they get to be as freshmen in colleges, they have about an 8th, 9th grade reading level. And yet, what is Santa Ana School District using their time for? They're holding during class sessions, they're holding an LGBTQ fair in which little boys and little girls are being targeted and taught how to apply makeup. Right? This is what's happening here. And explain to me, okay, so these moms and dads marched into the school board and wanted to know why they weren't allowed to opt out. Hey, moms and dads, why are you walking down to the school board to try to talk to them? You know what they're going to do? Mrs. Hernandez, you have 2 minutes to speak, and they all pick up their cell phones, right? And while you're talking to the school board, they're texting each other about grocery lists. 2 minutes later, you're shut off, and that's the end of the discussion. Instead of trying to talk to these numbskulls, why aren't you down there yanking your kid out of his desk by the scruff of his neck and homeschooling him or finding a private educational system for them? If you have to go on your hands and knees to beg permission to talk to them about why they didn't give you an opt-out for this, you have already lost this battle.
Well, and the thing is, Davis points out, is this is a huge issue, not just about the state's new sex ed law, but it's how the problem is bigger because liberals are exploiting the Spanish-speaking communities to implement this. So basically, it's California law that you're supposed to be providing the Spanish-speaking communities with any opt-out or information in Spanish. Mm-hmm. But Santa Ana has not done that. So none of these parents, even if they would have sent it out, they're largely Hispanic community. They would not have been able to know what it said anyway.
You mean the Progressive California School District is withholding information from Hispanic students by speaking only English? CC colonialism, right? I mean, my God. Let this be a lesson to you, to our Hispanic friends in California. If you think for 1 minute Gavin Newsom and his Dog and Pony educational show really cares about you as minorities, and I know you got a great quote about this from a mom, right? In fact, read that quote right away.
Yeah, so one mom at the meeting said, how can a state that claims to be so much for the rights of immigrants and minorities then ignore our concerns on purpose? They are hypocrites.
That's the problem. You actually think, Mom, that California wants all those illegal immigrants in the state because they care about your Hispanic heritage, that they really want to make America a more diverse place. No nonsense, no. They want you to vote reliably, as unfortunately you do, for half-wit idiot soy boys like Gavin Newsom, who then turn around and don't care about you or your culture. They're going to you know what Gavin Newsom and the California education system wants for all those beautiful Hispanic kids in the schools? They want them to turn into the pale, ghostly images of white progressive liberals. Once they've got you here, they don't want to hold on to your culture. They don't want to empower you as Spanish Mexican immigrants. What they want to do is turn you into pasty white reflections of the liberal progressive power base that keeps voting for people who keep doing this and exploiting minority kids this way.
Yeah, and the thing is, Davis argues how it's on purpose that they're not being given any information, because if these people actually knew what was being taught to their children, they would hopefully they would actually pull their kids out, because they are wholeheartedly opposed to LGBT-based sex ed.
I simply ask you this. If the Mexican government was doing to Mexican little kids what the California government is, I'm pretty sure that the Mexican people would not sit for it, right? That the level of outrage and the level of retributive action would be staggering, right? But in California, because the Californians are withholding information in Spanish to the parents who can't do this kind of reading, again, I'm going to say to you again, California immigrants, if you trust what your state government is telling you, you think they have your best interest at heart, you're crazy. Pull them out of those schools. Why not create a Hispanic co-op, right? Why not create a co-op where Hispanic teachers are educating Hispanic kids and letting moms and dads and the religious backgrounds of these people dictate when and where and how sex is taught?
Yeah, and I want to just bring up the point that Davis made in her article, and it's things that we continue to say. But she put, if you think this is just another case of wacky California paying the price for their wacky voting habits, think again. This is coming to a state and a school district near you, and it's been happening. Everything
that gets flushed down the California toilet ends up seeping into the corroded pipes of all these other states. All the way across the country, as we just saw, South Carolina is now getting into the let's monitor your kids from the moment they're born. I'm surprised they don't put, instead of putting little pink wrist tags, little pink and blue wrist tags upon people's little newborn babies' wrists, maybe South Carolina and California, maybe they could just put like tracking bracelets, right? From the moment that little hand reaches itself out of the womb, a little tracking handcuff, and get rid of all that pink and blue gender stuff. And speaking of gender in California,
let's go to an interview that Dr. Duke did with Alex Newman talking about the California sex ed program and how it's misleading our youth, risking more HIV.
Bringing in now our international correspondent, Alex Newman. Alex, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me, Duke. It's great to be with you.
It seems like every time we're together, we could spend the whole time talking about California. California in the news again today. They have something called the Healthy Youth Act that on its surface doesn't seem to be as bad as California law usually is. And the Healthy Youth Act suggests basically that kids must be notified about the risks associated with all sorts of different kinds of sexuality. Seems to me if you're going to be teaching any sex ed in the schools, I'd rather you didn't, that might be a useful thing. But in true California style, they have completely subverted that. Talk about your newest article for Freedom Project.
Well, they don't call it the land of fruits and nuts for nothing, Duke. There's a good reason California has earned this reputation. And so under the Healthy Youth Act, they're supposed to be teaching the children, among other things, the relative risks of different sexual activities. And what we found out, in correspondence, we've been receiving information from elected officials, school officials, medical professionals. What's happened is they have chosen a couple of curricula that are said to be in alignment with the requirements of the Healthy Youth Act, and several of the ones that are considered most in alignment with the Healthy Youth Act actually make a very dangerous claim. They tell the children that it is a low-risk activity to engage in anal sex with a condom. Of course, that is not true. The FDA does not approve condoms for anal sex. The studies that have been done show that they fail often more than 30% of the time. And so if you're telling children that it's a low-risk activity to engage in anal sex with a condom, you are basically making sure that 30% of the time somebody's going to get AIDS, someone's going to get some sexually transmitted disease, a venereal disease. And this is not medically accurate. The statute requires that the information be medically accurate. It's not. A whole bunch of doctors have testified to this, and it's very dangerous.
We are, the state of California and gay advocates all across the country would rather lie to children about the safety of anal intercourse than to cast any aspersions on it that might be perceived as homophobic.
That's exactly what's happening here, Duke. And I think the reason that they're lying to the children in this way is just political correctness. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that there is a very real risk from this. They want children engaging in these sorts of activities, and they're willing to lie to them to bring that about. about. And to their credit, actually, there are some homosexual activists who are speaking out about this. There's one homosexual journalist who ended up getting infected with HIV. His name is Josh Robbins, and he's all about the lifestyle and all the rest of it. But even he here is coming in and saying this is not medically accurate information. You're giving false information to children that's putting them at risk of an HIV infection. That needs to stop.
I would go one step further, Alex. I don't know that the officials in California are afraid of political correctness. I think that they, in their utopian way, don't want to do anything that's going to stop kids from experimenting sexually, particularly with things as radical as anal intercourse. We're teaching kids in late middle school and high school now about, we're treating anal intercourse as if it's the equal sign. Remember the blue bumper sticker with the yellow equal sign. This is liberal logic when it comes to behavior. Everything must be the same thing. So our schools in California and throughout the country are now equating anal intercourse with vaginal intercourse as if they are somehow similar. They're not. And what they're doing in California is masking that difference in ways that favor the move towards homosexual relationships.
That's exactly right, Duke. And when you combine it with the broader package here, one of the curriculum that's supposed to be most in alignment with this Healthy Youth Act, it's called the Teen Talk. And if you look at other components of this Teen Talk, aside from just lying to the kids and telling them it's low risk to engage in sodomy with a condom, they're also telling them that they can be any gender that they want, and if they just mutilate their genitals, then suddenly they're going to become a different sex. We actually have a video that we'll play quickly so people can get kind of a feel for what's under this Teen Talk program.
We're not just trying to make school a safe place for trans kids,
but for all kids.
Because we all have gender.
Or do we?
Gender fluid, gender queer, gender non-conforming.
And it's not just trans people that are targeted for it.
Not to mention, some boys wear dresses.
And plenty of girls like action figures.
Kids don't have hang-up about gender the way adults do.
School should be a place to learn, grow, change, and even experiment.
Yeah, and isn't that kind of
amazing?
Yeah, amazing.
And so there you can see, what they're recommending, what they're pushing on these kids. You and I have actually talked about another component of this. They're teaching kindergartners about transgenderism. They're using a book that they recommend for 4- or 5-year-olds, first graders, teaching them that gender is a spectrum and there's infinite genders. 15 genders are listed in this book. This stuff is psychologically abusive. It is incredibly dangerous. And the agenda is much broader than just, perverting the children, sexualizing the children.
You said that well, and we've long known that the psychological and social development of our kids was not their concern, right? They are interested in getting hold of our kids, these schools, younger and younger, primarily to sexualize them and primarily to push them to alternative sexualities and genders. We know that. What's really shocking about the latest story you've reported on is even the biological health of the children is they're willing to compromise that to push their agenda, right? Rather than point out to kids, look, there is no fully safe way to have anal intercourse. That anal intercourse is the most problematic sex that you can have. Rather than tell them that and let them draw their own conclusions, again, we mask that. It's not just the social and emotional wellness of our kids that they've given up in the public schools trying to protect. Now even the biological health of our kids, in the name of this new ideology, is suspect.
It is. And, in my opinion, every government official involved in promoting these lies to these children ought to be held personally liable in a court of law every time a child gets HIV as a result of this information. It's simply unconscionable that these lies with deadly consequences are being spread in the public schools of California. It is atrocious. It is a crime, and I think these people need to be held accountable in a court of law.
Well, let's go back across the country to Amherst College in Massachusetts, where they just released this insane common language standards. It's called the Common Language Document. So creative. And it was released by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. They sent it out in an email, and it lays out definitions for all sorts of words, as they say, in an effort to assist people in talking with one another about their identities and positions.
In other words, you have a university now that is creating a document designed to tell people on campus, from janitors all the way to chancellors, how you will talk about certain issues. And when certain words come up, these are the only approved definitions of those words that you are allowed to use on our campus. You could not become more Orwellian if Orwell himself showed up with a T-shirt that said UMass Amherst. This is more Orwell than Orwell could have imagined.
You Orwelled yourself.
I Orwelled myself.
All right,
Orwelled myself.
Well, exactly. Well, let's talk about something Orwell discussed. Capitalism is one of the terms.
This is one of the terms that when you discuss the word capitalism on the Amherst College, this is, according to the document, is how you have to do it.
This is what you must be thinking when we say capitalism. Know that it is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. This system leads to exploitive labor practices which affect marginalized groups disproportionately.
So are you hearing that, Mom and Dad? When at University of Wisconsin, Massachusetts Amherst, when theoretically, when an economics teacher describes capitalism, he has to add that little codicil, right? Exploitive and discriminatory against people. That's what it is, how they do it.
All right, well, what about legal/illegal?
About immigrants, right? Just define the way we're allowed on the Amherst College campus to talk about legal and illegal.
It's a highly racialized term to describe a person's presence in a nation without government-issued immigration status. It's not an appropriate noun or adjective to describe an individual. And they added that it's often misused to designate certain undocumented members of a society, specifically people of color, to deny their contributions, right to exist, and recognition as people within certain national boundaries.
So to use the word illegal immigrant is to deny the right of a person to exist. How wonderfully linguistic this is. And look, think about what could happen to you at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, Massachusetts, in Massachusetts. Think about what would happen if you, just like failing to use the right pronoun, what if you fail to use the right definition of illegal alien? What if you use that word but don't immediately qualify it by quoting exactly what the guideline says you must say?
Yeah, I can only imagine, because it's Massachusetts, so it's not like
the University of
Massachusetts Amherst. Yeah, but right? It's in the UMass system.
It is, yeah.
So Hiawatha lives up there. Anyway.
Hiawatha. Can I define that? According to let's define Hiawatha according to University of Massachusetts Amherst dictionary required definitions. Hiawatha, right? Pale face, fake Indian, stealer of heritages, liar to get gain and tenure at Harvard University, now president candidate, idiot rich woman, decrying wealth, right? Could you ever imagine Amherst making such an obviously true definition for someone like Hiawatha instead of coming up with this garbage? I love the next one, the way they must define assimilation.
Assimilation. This is frowned upon and happening as a response to forms of oppression, including, but not limited to, xenophobia, racism, cis heteronormativity, and religious oppression, among other types of oppression.
So, the idea that an immigrant, we can't call them an illegal alien, although we will, the idea that an illegal alien in this country is asked to assimilate, learn a little English, participate in local civics classes, understand the history of the culture, to become not a Mexican or a Guatemalan living in America, but to become an American. To ask that now is, again, a response to its oppression, it's xenophobia, it's racism, it's cis heteronormativity, and it is religious oppression all rolled into one. So everyone in the world should come here, but nobody in the world should become an American, because to do so is oppressive. So in other words, there is no America to these people, right?
I'm surprised melting pot hasn't been
such
an awful term.
It's already, that's so passé they don't even bother to list it here.
I'm guessing the restaurant melting pot will just vanish. All right, well, my favorite, because it just sounds ridiculous, is the white savior complex. Now, this is an attitude or posture of condescending benevolence based on the idea that white people inherently are in a position to, and are qualified to, save people of color. This can be seen internationally as well as domestically. See Eurocentrism and American exceptionalism.
So, according to the genius liberals at Amherst, right, on the one hand, white people are responsible for all the evils in the world, and white people exclusively have all the power in the country. So consequently, when white people realize, according to you, that we have the power, and we try to use that power to help minorities, we are now engaging in white savior complex. So on the one hand, we are all powerful. On the other hand, when we seek to give away that power, we are engaging in white savior complex, which is also Eurocentrism, American exceptionalism, and racism. Only in places like Massachusetts could you get away with stupidity like this. And we would be remiss not to point out, Katie, that the minute this was emailed, such a blowback occurred that what happened?
Yeah, it was a hot second before Norm Jones, who's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, sent a follow-up email saying, I believe it was a mistake to send it from my office to the entire community because of the implication that the guide is meant to dictate speech and expression or ideology on campus. It does not represent an official position of the college or an expectation that everyone on campus should use any particular language or share a point of view. The goal was to help create greater awareness of the ways many people at Amherst and beyond understand their own identities.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that this was it was an accident that you sent it out. It's always an accident when people get upset, right?
Whoops.
But it was not meant to dictate the ways that people speak, and yet the entire document does nothing but dictate the ways people speak. And what that tells us now is we're about 5 years away before they can do that without having to replace it, right? We're about 5 years. They're not quite as far down the road to Orwellian nonsense as they thought they were. And so now there was a little test balloon, right? They floated it out there. The little language police was, and the immediate response dictated that, okay, we'll try this again in 5 years and see where we are then.
Before we move on to our next story, I want to take my own hot second here. Every week, we bring you the crazy stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses. But we also back up what we say with Freedom Project Academy.
Well, do you remember when America's schools would teach you about patriotism and history, and you'd say the Pledge of Allegiance and maybe even say a prayer? Of course you don't.
You've sent something to me this weekend, and you said, what is the name of this place?
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project.
Freedom Project Academy. And you know, one of the toughest decisions we can make as parents is how to educate our kids and with whom.
Our last two kids we put into a school online. And I wish I had known at the time about Freedom Project Academy.
They put into practice what we talk about in the movie Indoctrination, where we're talking about the problems of the public school system. Well, they provide an alternative, and an amazing alternative.
What you're doing is so incredibly important. The greatest teaching is going to happen outside of the traditional college, high school structure. It's going to be going back to the great roots of Aristotle and Ayn Rand and Adam Smith. So I fully endorse and love what you're talking about.
This past year, my wife and I took the plunge, and we were like, you know what? Let's enroll one of our own children in there. And so our son Noah has been in Freedom Project Academy this year, and it's been amazing.
My band spends probably 200 days a year on the road, and I didn't want to leave my little girl at home, so we searched and searched for a way that she could do school and still be with me. And then we found FPA, and for us, it's absolutely perfect.
The classical education is the way to go. It's the way Thomas Jefferson learned. It's the way Ben Franklin learned.
This is the answer. It's affordable, it's flexible, the parents are loving it, and mostly I think it's the kids. They're coming home and they're saying, I don't hate school anymore. I love school.
They're utilizing the tools of the future while giving an education that is rooted in tradition and timeless moral values. So it's the best of both worlds. It's the best of every world, really. And best of all, no government involved.
And you can do it with the best teachers, the best methods, and the best classes in the world. And I don't think there's any place better than that right now than Freedom Project Academy.
I love Freedom Project. I love what you're doing. It's so important. And the more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board. And I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack. And because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
Visit freedomforschool.com. That's freedomforschool.com. Request a free information packet and see what Freedom Project Academy is all about. Our 10% tuition discount ends on March 31st, so hurry up. Take a look-see and see if it's right for you. That's freedomforschool.com. All right, moving on to the final story. Let's talk about how President Trump just signed an executive order about free speech on college campuses.
Yeah, and we got to give a huge big hand to Donald Trump for following through on one of his campaign promises and following through on the promise he made to CPAC a couple weeks ago. He promised that he would do this. He would make a statement arguing that we must mandate the right of free speech for everybody on college campuses. And what's really interesting about this, it's an executive order. It's a promise fulfilled. Trump suggested at the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, held earlier this month, that he planned to mandate that colleges and universities respect students' right to free speech, particularly as it relates to accepting conservative speakers on campus. And that is a big win. Now, again, interestingly, he's not targeting the schools directly. He is targeting all of the federal agencies who give grants and money to the schools. Because if we know one thing about all the fake Marxism on universities, the only thing they really care about is the pocketbook. The only thing that's going to move schools to change their minds on being more tolerant about free speech is money, right? And so if universities seek federal funding from any of 12 different agencies, they must prove that they have a serious commitment to honoring the edicts of the First Amendment as it applies to the students who spend time on their respective campuses.
Well, I say it's about time, and I can't believe that it took him this long to have it happen. But at the same token, this is the country where we had to build up all the proof that you can see conservative speakers, anyone who doesn't toe the line of the progressives, that they need that proof before they would actually make a move. So it's a good move on Trump's part. We'll see exactly what comes of it. Hopefully something important.
Yep, and Fox News reports that the order, quote, directs 12 grant-making agencies, major ones, to use their authority in coordination with the White House Office of Management and Budget to ensure institutions that receive any federal research or education grants promote free speech and free inquiry. As somebody who has experienced again and again and again as a university professor, kids complaining about words. I remember just this semester, right? I've been criticized for daring to criticize feminism, right? I dare to criticize radical academic feminism in my classrooms. This is now seen as a kind of bullying and intimidation because these young little snowflakes can't handle hearing any argument that disagrees with what they think they know or the arguments that the progressive professors have fed them. So not only are the universities increasingly intolerant of conservative speech, even speech that seeks to criticize rampant leftism is now considered possibly hate speech. Good for you, Donald Trump. And the fact that universities have already come out and said, we don't need this, we don't need this, we already honor the First Amendment. Good. The minute you don't, and you know you won't, the minute you don't, let's see how you feel when billions of dollars of grant money is suddenly pulled from you.
Yeah, well, we know how we feel about this. But Cabot Phillips of Campus Reform, he likes to go out and ask students, how do you feel about certain things that are happening? So he went to Marymount University in Virginia, and he sought to get student opinions ahead of Trump's signing of the executive order on free speech. And he wanted to ask the students, what types of speech should be allowed on campus?
Where do you think the line should be drawn on what speech should be allowed, and then what speech crosses a line and shouldn't be allowed on campuses?
I think if it's hateful and disrespectful to specific groups, then that's not okay. But
I can be disrespectful to you though, right? I have the right?
Yeah, but it's not nice.
But does the Constitution say I have to be nice though?
No, I don't know.
It's okay to disagree, but you have to do it respectfully and in an adult manner, because if you're going to talk about free speech, then you need to back it up with facts and not just your personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. But as far as having the right to speak up, I'm allowed to be disrespectful, right?
No.
I am though, right? I mean, the First Amendment says I can speak out.
I mean, if you want to be that's your life choice.
Rude, hate speech, discriminatory. The problem is that the left defines them all the same way, right? These careful distinctions these college kids are trying to make. You can be rude but not disrespectful. You can say things that upset people, but you can't use hate speech. The problem is that the average progressive teacher sees all of them as the same, right? To challenge somebody's worldview, to argue with somebody about their deeply held beliefs, to argue perhaps that biology does matter, not just your gender preference. To say any of these things now, it is rude, it is hate speech, it is disrespect, it's all of those things. The mere presence of a conservative speaker on a college campus ticks every single box, right? Disrespectful, hateful, racist, bigoted, homophobic, sexist. So go back to what Cabot's doing. Let's inform the people with some more of what these Marymount students had to say.
I understand you have free rights to say what you want about people, but when it's negatively impacting our school as a whole and other students around you, that's crossing the line.
You can say what you want until it impacts negatively our school. And as you can see right now, and that's how you get what happened at Amherst College, University of Massachusetts Amherst, right? because everything that progressives don't like is considered a negative impact on the college. They're telling you that when you define the word economics, you have to have a 3-sentence codicil appended about how racist and sexist it is. This is exactly the kind of attitude. And these two kids, God bless these kids, they are too stupid to be able to step out of the paradigm in which these issues were forced on them from the time they became freshmen. So they don't even realize that the speech they're speaking is the speech of university administrators and diversity officers.
Well, and it goes back to everything that we've been saying this entire episode. If go back to the very first story when we talked about Common Core and you talked about how kids don't even know the definition of sorrow. They don't know the understanding. They don't even know what hate speech is. They can't define it because all they've ever been told is what these teachers and then professors have said it means. And that's why you get this at Amherst, you get the guide saying exactly here's what the definition is going to be instead of actually looking at what it should be. And then something like hate speech, which you can only define by what you view it as. There is no actual definition. Their kids are going to then just go into whatever has been taught to them. They can't think for themselves to get out of it.
And to follow up on what you just said, Katie, very well said, every university in this country, with the possible exception of Hillsdale, is non-compliant to what Trump just signed, right? Because the big problem we have is that the kids themselves don't know how to speak outside of the progressive box they've been put in. So and look at the last quote you have. One kid was asked about Trump's executive order.
President Trump this week is signing an executive order saying that if a university does not defend the First Amendment on campus and students' free speech rights, that they could lose taxpayer funding.
Seems like a reasonable idea, but I personally don't really like Trump, so I feel like there's like some undercurrent that I probably wouldn't agree with.
Even with all of the indoctrination that they've had, when asked about Trump, who they hate, Trump's executive order guaranteeing free speech on campuses, yeah, I guess so. Despite of all of the pressure and the historical ignorance of these kids don't know what the First Amendment says. These kids have no idea what's in the Constitution. These kids have no idea how many people fought and died for the right of people to speak freely on college campuses. They know nothing about that. And in spite of all of that indoctrination, when push comes to shove, the kids grudgingly still say, I guess so, right? It's not a ringing endorsement. But even if that little spark of individuality can grow in the sterile intellectual desert of the American college progressive campus, it shows you that if these kids had just a little balance in their education, they'd be fighting back against the universities with much greater anger than they're fighting car companies and gas companies now.
It's time for some extra credit, sponsored in part by the Big Apple of New York, New York. If you're planning to take a class at NYU this summer, consider taking The Feminist Journalist, being taught by Lauren Duca. Her qualifications include being an ex-teen voguer and hating men. Also, she says she's prepared to bite some willies off. Anywho, the syllabus was released for the upcoming class, revealing that 20% of the grade is based on having a Twitter account, and having taken a pointed opinion within your Twitter account. In a tweet, she then stated, NYU students, let's get weird this summer. Hashtag, what a weirdo.
It seems to me she's violating every feminist tenet in the book.
You may reconsider taking any journalism class at NYU after it was announced that the journalism department hired for the upcoming fall a former New Yorker fact-checker who falsely claimed that an immigration and customs enforcement agent was a Nazi. Talia Levin took to Twitter in June of last year, claiming that an ICE agent's tattoo looked like an iron cross. In reality, it was a symbol of his platoon from when he fought in Afghanistan. But whoopsie, her bad. Now Levin will be teaching a class at NYU on reporting on the far right in America. It's called Reporting on the Far Right.
So you're not actually hiring real hardcore journalists. You're hiring opinion peacemakers to become journalist professors. Maybe that's why we're graduating so many journalism majors who think reporting is nothing more than a glorification of your own opinion.
And since we're talking about getting into college classes, Dr. Dre, who is straight out of Compton, wants everyone to know that unlike Lori Loughlin's daughters, his daughter got into USC all on her own. Truly Young, yes, that's her name, Truly Young, got into USC entirely on her own, according to a now-deleted Instagram post. But why was the proud moment deleted? It may be because Dre forgot to mention that he donated $70 million to the school back in 2013 to create an academy for arts, technology, and business, and there's a building with his name on it. What a gangster.
Making it rain on his baby girl.
Let's talk about something more comforting, or maybe not, as University of Minnesota is looking to prohibit most pets from university offices, labs, and classrooms. Now you may have thought, well, duh. But you'd be wrong. The craze of emotional support animals is ever increasing, be it a dog, a snake, a pig, or a peacock. But UMN may shut it down because dogs bark, lunge, excrete, and offend people of Muslim faith since the saliva of a dog is thought to be unclean. And there it is. Legally, the university must allow service animals. But the question remains, will they allow gophers on campus?
Dogs were fine on campus until Muslims were offended by them, right? I'm surprised they still serve bacon in the cafeteria.
Let's end today outside of America because the crazy crosses borders. We can count on the Swedes, who are attempting to break traditional gender roles in their youngins. In the final year of compulsory school, teenagers apply for a summer work placement, and this year, the authorities, matching the teens with the jobs, are deliberately seeking to counteract traditional gender patterns. According to Chairman Mohammed Hassan, we have to work to foster gender equality at all levels, and we must start early. So kids who already don't want to work over the summer must now do a job that they may have absolutely no interest in. But it's about equality.
We're going to take boys, regardless of how they identify. We don't even bother to ask them. We're going to take boys and make them do girls' work. And we're going to take girls and make them do boys' work. Notice how absolute gender is when you're sociologically engineering little kids. But the minute we get to college, then those things dissipate, right? They don't exist at all.
And that's your extra credit for this week. Now all you need to do is give us a comment below with any suggested stories you want us to cover. You can do that right now, right below there. Then head over to iTunes and subscribe to the Dr. Duke Show podcast. Leave us a 5-star review, and don't forget to like our Freedom Project page on Facebook for daily articles and videos.
And that more than does it for us this week on the Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you've heard, please share the podcast with your friends. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and we'll do this again next week.